tonight's guest speaker session hosted by the Emirates Online Faculty of Humanities. Thank you all for taking the time out of your schedules to join us for what promises to be a very insightful and engaging session. It's my privilege to introduce you to our guest speaker tonight, Mr. Warwick Jones, who's going to be taking us through tonight's discussion. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Warwick.
Hello. Sorry, I'm gonna turn this on and get going. Yeah, I'm Warwick. I have been lecturing for a hot minute. And thank you everyone for letting me come on here and talk about what were some interesting years of my life. But I think things like this are always fun to talk about. And I remember kind of way back when I was kind of teaching intercultural communication. I think, Naz, you'll have to correct me, it was like my third or fourth year in the profession. And Naz was peer reviewing me, and she sat in a class and we were having like a discussion about different cultures and those kinds of things. And it's always been something I've really enjoyed. So I'm going to get to do it once again, given that I don't teach on I'm not allowed. I don't teach on first year at the moment. Naz, that is a phenomenal memory. Shocking. But yeah, so I kind of want to introduce this or introduce the topic from a personal perspective, because it is, culture for me is an inherently sort of personal thing. It's something that I've spent a lot of time kind of thinking and talking about. And it all kind of stemmed from a particular 2 years in my life. So way back when, I think it's 7 or 8 years ago now, I decided that it would be such a good idea to teach English in China, working for EF. It was an interesting move. I think like most people who decide to go and teach English,
Warwick, sorry, I think you've muted yourself.
sorry. Did you miss the whole thing, or was it a sudden change?
It was just the last 2 or 3 seconds.
Oh, okay. So yeah, an incredibly kind of personal thing to me. I think a couple of years ago, I decided to go and teach English overseas. You don't really get to choose where you go when you join some of these companies. And I didn't get to choose, but I got put in Shanghai, which is an enormous city in China. I think it's like 25 million people or something. It's an absurd number of people living in one city. And it also means that you kind of get the best of both worlds. So parts of it are kind of very industrialized, big buildings, big offices, lots of people living on top of each other. And I'm not sure why I decided to live so far away from work, but I decided to live in that kind of bustling part of Shanghai. And then I would take about a 40-minute bullet train all the way out to the edge of the city to teach English, where, the community is more rural. It was always interesting because I'd start the journey and no one would talk to you because I think in big cities, that's just how lots of people are. And then by the end of the train, I'd have like young children like playing with my hair and stuff like that on the train. So really kind of like two different worlds that I inhabited at the same time. Things become interesting, I think, in China. We kind of tend to take for granted these sort of cultural comforts that we have. Their version of Red Bull was absolutely dreadful. It was super sweet. It tasted like vanilla. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I was thoroughly disappointed. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I perpetually have an energy drink in my hand. And when I asked for, what a good replacement was, I was sent towards this strange product, which I can't even remember the name of, but I remember taking a picture of the advertising because the translation was so interesting. It literally says, "This leaf is powerful." So kind of, those weird, fascinating moments. The food was really good, which was a positive. And when I was there, I think the most interesting part of kind of moving to China and living there for near on 2 years was big cities like Shanghai tend to attract people from all over the world. And so my colleagues were sort of from different people. I worked with a Russian woman. There were kind of American people there as well. I think there was one other South African in the school that I was at. There was a Norwegian guy. Basically, just a whole bunch of different human beings from very different places trying to coexist, cohabit, and not kill each other, which can be challenging in a working environment. Um, as I kind of, put down small roots, I would say I started to run into other South Africans. I think we tend to attract each other like if they quite strongly, almost like magnets. The first time I heard Afrikaans in a club in China, I remember running up to that person and almost dive tackling them because I was just so excited to meet someone from home. But I think as you kind of live there, you experience different things, you kind of meet different people. There was a strange Russian artist who's pictured on the bottom right, who I still follow on Instagram but haven't had a conversation with in years. But it's just all of these kind of different people that you work with, and then you also go out with people from all these different cultures, and it just becomes really different. You have to kind of recontextualize yourself differently. You have to think of yourself differently. Because they, like people from other cultures, think differently as well. And I remember the kind of the first second I sort of got out of the airport, and you're kind of bombarded by all these sounds and smells. And I'm not going to lie to you, I wept. I wept on the way to the airport. ATMs there don't work the same, so I managed to basically the money comes out first. So I left my card somewhere. I had no money until I could get it replaced. It was just a series of chaotic events in the especially the first couple days. Extreme culture shock. Um, Obviously a kind of culture as different as from Western concepts as Chinese means that the food is very different. So you walk into a supermarket and there are kind of live frogs hopping around in a basket, which is completely normal there and quite delicious. But still like weird to see that in basically a pick and pay. You can't, cheese is very difficult to find. So it's just weird like nuances that change. And also I think getting used to the kind of different food conventions becomes difficult. So fast food there is not seen as something that's good. And to be honest, I ate a lot of street food in China. And I didn't get food poisoning once, but I touched KFC even once. I think I had it twice and I nearly died both times. I'm being dramatic. I got really sick though. So yeah, so kind of when I first got there, was entirely out of my depth. I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't know, what anyone was doing, or what I was supposed to do. I didn't know how to talk to people. I had this kind of app on my phone, a Google Translator, which I'd kind of scan everything with. When I was talking to people, I'd ask them to kind of like type onto my phone, so that I could literally communicate with anybody, because English is not well spoken all over the world. But yeah, so what I kind of want us to do, and this is going to tie into an activity later, is have you ever felt like that? And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a foreign country, um, but have you ever felt isolated, experienced kind of that weird cultural uh, change, not being able to find the food you like, just been or felt out of your depth? And as I said, it doesn't have to be a new country. I moved to Joburg a couple of years ago before moving back. But I moved to Joburg for work, and I remember not fitting in. I mean, Joburg's an interesting place because I think everyone there is very friendly. Most people have moved to Joburg, and everyone's kind of looking to make friends, which I really liked about it. But what I couldn't keep up with, my dudes, and I will say this again and again, is everyone in Joburg has a side hustle or is doing something like ridiculous. So I did not make a friend who wasn't either training for a triathlon opening like an Etsy store or doing something absurd. Like just the expectation is that you are hustling at the same time. And for me, like I'm from a small town in the middle of nowhere. Like I want to earn my paycheck, I want to go home, and I want to pretend I'm not alive until the next day when I go back to work. So it was just this, that was also a very kind of weird culture kind of shock moment. Um, but when we are communicating with people from other cultures, one of the most fascinating things I always go back to, and I think it's something that you guys would have just learned, or especially if you're in first year at the moment, that there's a basic premise to communication that we tend to take for granted sometimes. And we move beyond as we kind of get into second and third and especially honors and thereafter. But there's a central premise to communication, I think, that we tend to forget about. And it's this bad boy. So what I want to ask from the chat real quick is I'd like you to give me a quick little synopsis of your opinion on this. So we've got this very classic model of communication, which is that, you know, there are three different parts to, well, four if you count noise, but three different parts to communication, right? It's the basic model we learn at the very beginning. There's a sender, there's a receiver, and there's a message. Where do you think, and there isn't really a wrong answer because it's complicated, but where do you think that communication, that understanding takes place? I have put there the little things. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. You can just give a thumbs up if you think it's the sender, a little heart reaction if you think it's the message, and a little clap if you think it's the receiver. Who is understanding the things? We've got a clap. We've got another clap. We're clapping. Okay. I think you guys have done this before. But yeah, it is absolutely the receiver. Obviously, the sender is encoding messages, so they are taking what they understand and they're meeting, putting it into a message and sending it across. The creating of the message is important because that's where the information goes. And then the receiver is kind of decoding this message, right? So the receiver is the person who is taking the words that you've given them and trying to unpack what meaning is there. And so in communication science, we tend to say that the receiver is far more important, as a bit rude, but far more important than the sender in the communication of meaning, because it's the receiver who is essentially unpacking that message, who is deciding what they understand at the end of the day, or what is within their capacity to understand. You could write the greatest message of your whole life, with the, you know, most simple, beautiful English you've ever put together. If the person you're sending it to doesn't print the tile, they're not going to decode. Yeah, they're not going to understand what's cracking. So yeah, meaning might be created by the sender, but understanding happens on the receiver's end. And the tricky part of cultural communication, or with cultural communication, is that the human brain is very lazy. This is a hill I will die on. I think my poor honors class have heard this 100 times, but the human brain is inherently lazy. It is trying to make things easier for us. So it will create categories. It will shorten anything it can. It has a whole bunch of techniques that it uses to make the world much simpler than it is. When you look out at the room around you, I know most of you are probably looking at a screen at the moment, but if I look out at kind of the room around me, there's a table, there's chairs, there's a bookcase with lots of books in it. Even though my eyes could see, you know, what the titles of the different books are, my brain's cutting that out to save itself having to do more work. So brains are lazy. It's a hill I'll die on. You can't convince me otherwise. But yeah, and one of the things that makes our lives much easier is what we call the script. And scripts are kind of developed in different places. Most of them come from culture, though. A script is basically like a thing that tells us how something is going to go. So when we meet someone, the script tells us what should happen in that thing, and that's a cultural understanding. Because in a certain culture, we'll say hello, we'll ask how are you, I'm well, thanks. How are you? And then there'll be like maybe a moment of awkward silence before we decide what to talk about. But that's the script, right? Or when we're talking to our parents, we'll have a chat, they'll say, I love you, and we'll say, I love you back, right? That's the script. Sometimes that script can get muddled when things don't go our way. But the difficulty with script is that they are from culture, which means that when we're communicating with someone from a different culture, they often don't have the same script that we do. So they are thinking that that conversation is going to go a very different way and looking out for different things. An example I can think of easily is that silence or pauses in a conversation are much more natural in some cultures than others. I lived with this American girl from Texas. We were roommates, and she could not like stand silence. And so she would fill it every single time with things. Whereas at least in kind of my cultural background, silence is kind of good. You give yourself a moment to breathe. You think about what you're going to talk next. We're allowed not to talk to each other when we're hanging out. But for her, and from what I've heard, like many Americans, silence is not something that's seen as good in a communicative action because it kind of conveys discomfort. So yeah, so very different things that kind of tend to happen when we are following our scripts. So yeah, so even though we say that understanding rests with the receiver, what we're also saying is that when you are sending a message in this way, your job is kind of to understand how that message is going to be received and to design messages that are going to fit best the people that you are talking to. Which means in any one setting, you've got to know what's acceptable. You've got to understand what cultural noise might be in the way, and you have to learn to adapt your script to the people that you're speaking to. And it means that when you live in a very kind of intercultural setting, I think South Africa is a really good example. I do think South Africans are much better at this than others because we're kind of used to intercultural communication. On some level, I think we're more similar than we like to admit, the different South African cultures. But on the whole, we're much better at tweaking our scripts to accept variance than people who come from non-diverse backgrounds. So yeah. So what I want to do next is kind of return to the thing that we were talking about earlier. And I kind of want you to share an experience that you may have had in terms of kind of intercultural communication breakdown. Yeah, and while you are on that, I'm just going to check cognitive overload. Are there any South African import shops for food and snacks? I didn't see any, if I'm honest with you, Pavandra. I didn't see a single one. What I did see was Obiqua wine. So I went into a sort of Chinese bottle store in Shanghai and was trying to buy booze, obviously. And the only South African wine I could find was Obiqua, and it came in at about 200 Rand. I was so offended. Because one, why Obiqua? And two, why is it 200 Rand a bottle? Share. Okay, does everyone have the link? I'm gonna go on while you put up stuff, and then we'll come back to it at the end. Awaiting marshmallow eggs. I mean, appreciate it. I'm not a sweet tooth person, so it's not really my vibe. Okay. Okay. I'm going to assume everyone has a thing, but we will come back to it, and we can look at what the posts have said. So I just wanted to talk about some of the kind of more nuanced or specific issues that exist kind of across cultures, or just the ones that I've kind of mostly come into contact with. Saving face is a big thing in Eastern cultures. Apparently, it's kind of more sort of wider than that, but my experiences have mostly been with kind of more Eastern cultures. I haven't experienced it with any of my kind of European colleagues or anything like that. But face is a really interesting kind of concept. Has anyone heard of it before? Does anyone know what face is? Yeah.
I don't remember, sorry.
No, I don't think it's something you've learned. You don't have to remember anything. But face in kind of in different sort of not different cultural settings, but face is this idea that when we are out in the world, we have our reputation that we're trying to protect, right? And some cultures take face much more seriously than others. And what I didn't kind of understand when I moved to China is that face is huge there. And so when you're working with other people and someone makes a mistake, you don't go to their boss to tell them they've done something wrong, and you don't let anyone else in the office know that they've done something wrong. You are supposed to culturally give them the opportunity to fix their mistake first. I didn't know this. I kind of just went on and did my own thing, and was not well liked for a while because it was early on, and it was a timetabling issue with the classes. So to me, big, like, you've scheduled me with 2 classes at the same time, and now I'm sitting here with a group of 3-year-olds who are screaming and crying and a group of 6-year-olds who are throwing things at the 3-year-olds. Not great. But I went to my manager and I was like, I'm not sure what I should do in this situation, and told her, and then she got that lady in trouble. My manager was American at the time. And that didn't go down well because in Chinese culture, you are supposed to allow people the opportunity to save face, to fix their own mistakes. Chinese culture in particular, and I do think this also rings true for kind of certain other cultures, but there's a very kind of blurred line between business and leisure. So I was invited to dinner with a colleague of mine, and I thought she was hitting on me, to be honest. I was about to be like, girl, wrong tree. But I thought she was hitting on me full on. She asked me out to dinner, and I was like, I don't think that's great. We're colleagues, we work together. That'd be weird. The issue is that kind of in Chinese cultures, business is seen or dinner is seen as a way of doing business. So you invite a new colleague out to get to know them, to talk about classes. So she invited me out to dinner to try and, discuss my timetable or discuss, I think at the time it was for a horrifying Halloween event. There is a picture of me on the internet somewhere dressed in a Pikachu onesie, giving a class to 3-year-olds. I have tried to scour it from the internet, but that was basically the premise of that dinner, is she wanted me to do this horrifying open class in a Pikachu onesie. It was not a jam. But yeah, so this idea of guangxi, or like this, business and being done during leisure time at the same time. There are also, I think most of us have learned this, but the distinction between high and low cultures. I come from a very British background, and British people are famously part of the high culture. I've never liked the fact that they call it high and low, but high basically just means that, people don't, we're not going to say anything directly. We're not going to express how we really feel. We're going to kind of hint at it, subtly guide you to understand that we're not happy in this situation. It's not good for relationships, I can tell you that. But directness is not always best depending on the culture that you're in. Thankfully, Chinese people also kind of practice high culture, so they will not criticize you directly, or say no directly even, but they'll kind of lead you to kind of understand that they're not super stoked with this idea. The difficulty is that Americans are very direct. And that ended up with our manager in Shanghai not being popular in any way, shape, or form. They considered her exceptionally rude. But yeah, and then another thing, which is just, kind of a small note, is that like not everything you're going to encounter is going to be good. So an issue that we had in China is, I was obviously in China, there were other South Africans there as well. And in some parts of China, like racism is rife. Not obviously well, obviously not against white people or, people of necessarily other cultures, but there is an issue with kind of dark-skinned people in China, to the point where for a long time, I don't know if you could see it in any of the pictures, I was very pale. And it's because there are skin lightening kind of chemicals in a lot of the moisturizers or soaps that you buy there. But obviously, I'd attached myself to these other South Africans, and we were rocking around with this girl named Palesa, and they wouldn't let her into some of the kind of clubs or venues that we wanted to go into. So not everything you're going to encounter is going to be positive. Some of them are, outright diabolical. Avoid like throwing your toys though. It's only going to make everyone uncomfortable and people angry, and often just a small kind of conversation with someone in a quiet space is a much better way of resolving that than anything else. Okay, so some things to avoid, things like ethnocentrism. There isn't a right culture, so don't let the cultural lens that you are viewing the world through be, considered normal. Just because certain cultures maybe eat differently or speak differently or behave in kind of different ways or value different things, that doesn't make their experience or their culture any kind of less than yours. Also, stereotyping is an issue because not all people from the same culture are the same. I feel like, that's kind of a given. When you are traveling, one of the first things you should really do is kind of learn a little bit about that place and the people there, so you can kind of get to understand them. And then I think kind of the most important one is avoiding complex language. So simple, straightforward language is always preferable when you're working in intercultural settings. Also, there were issues with kind of humor. People tend to have different senses of humor. I went on a date with this person in Shanghai, and they told me that they liked me because white people are often cold. And I was just like, what does that mean? What are you trying to say? That's really rude, actually, and I'm not stoked. And was joking about the fact that we were out on like the Bund River and I was shivering because it was freezing. But yeah, that's kind of the be careful with humor, I guess, because people are not always going to pick up on it. Letting things fester is also not a great idea. So leaving issues alone, or just the assumption, I think, that everything's going to be fine and everything's going to work itself out is not ideal. The best thing you can do is talk through issues, as with most things in life, I think. So kind of a no-brainer. And then, what we do have to do when we're in intercultural settings is listen actively. So this means, people are always communicating even when they aren't saying things. You have to look at things like body language. You have to also understand that body language might be different in different groups of people. My understanding is that in more kind of Slavic cultures, particularly Russian, smiling is not seen as overtly positive. And so kind of understanding those different nuances of body language is also kind of important. Prioritizing dialogue, so give the people around you chances to speak, right? And ask questions, right? To show that you're actively listening. And that doesn't mean cut someone off to ask a question. Let them finish and then ask questions to allow them to kind of clarify. Because you are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to get clarity out of people. And then also being adaptable. So things aren't always going to be as you expect them to be. Understanding that and understanding the lens, understanding this idea of a script is essentially the easiest thing you can do to feel better, or to be more comfortable in those spaces. Okay. And then, so I want to return to that thing. Has anyone written anything? We do have a wholesome raccoon and an eventide traveler. I will take our thing back to that screen quickly, just in case anyone else wants to put anything in. Okay, Eventide Traveler says, I found that most indigenous Indians do not know there is an Indian diaspora in South Africa. Often they disassociate us as Indian, even though they are shared cultures, religious beliefs, etc. Yeah, I mean, I think that's super valid. I also think it's fascinating for me, like when kind of the diaspora connects back with the kind of origin culture. Because I've also heard, I've got a friend here, who is from, uh, I think she's Taiwanese. But she was kind of saying, you know, she was born here, she was raised here, her parents are from Taiwan. And when she's gone back to visit, she doesn't really dig it. Um, just because like she doesn't really fit in, she doesn't really understand the cultural contexts. So I get that. I completely understand. I visited Vietnam a few years ago and was riding a rickshaw in Ho Chi Minh City. A local saw me and called me an American, though I'm South African. Yeah, yeah, no, that's so valid. I went to Germany once, and I think it was during the World Cup. That was years and years ago. It was during, I think, the World Cup. But we went to there and they heard us speaking English and they assumed we were British and they would not give us like service at this kind of local pie shop. They did not enjoy the fact that they thought we were British. When we explained we were South African, they were so much more friendly. But yeah, so those kinds of things can definitely creep in. Okay, we've got about 4 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? Anything like that? Let me just whip through the chat. I'm currently looking for a good KZN, Samosa in Cape Town. I feel, Naz, that I would struggle without like good Durban curry. Like Bunny Chow is just my favorite, and I cannot imagine living my life without it. Challenge accepted. I work with Chinese people. My experience is different than what you were saying. They're very direct. Oh, that's interesting. Do you mean in terms of like the insults? Because what they are quick to do is make kind of comments about the person that they're talking to. Um, I'm a fan of baggy clothes, so I often don't, look all that fit. And then I remember one of the teacher's aides did say that I was looking a little fat today, and that was a little intense for me. But yeah, careful not to kind of conflate directness with uh, being comfortable making bodily comments and stuff like that. I lived in Botswana for 4 years, and many people outside of school do not believe I was South African because my accent wasn't South African enough and thought it was American. Do you know what? I've had the same issue. People ask me, especially when I was younger, if I'm British. I'm not. I'm South African. But I guess I don't sound like most South Africans. But also, I think, yeah, different circumstances. In more uncomfortable settings, I tend to be very, very posh, prim and proper, as it were. Okay, any questions or experiences or anything, really? No? We're good? Well, Naz, look at that. I'm right on time. Between the supposed end time and maximum end time, a victory.
You did really well, Warwick, and I think that there's not so many questions just shows that you covered everything really holistically. And I just want to say I'm always in awe of the mind of Warwick. So thank you for coming this evening and giving us a peek into your unique and very insightful perspective. For me, it was a lovely session. It was also informative and thoroughly enjoyable. So thank you for giving us your time, and thank you to all students who've attended. But we will end the session now. And those who have APCT, you can now hop into your APCT sessions. So have a lovely evening and a very, very wonderful long weekend. And we'll catch up again soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant.